England was not at war. No enemy armies invaded its lands, nor were there uprisings within the country. Yet, in the summer of 1348, entire towns began to vanish from the face of the earth. A healthy person could go to bed and be dead within 3 days. Within a single month, villages were losing half of their inhabitants. Priests died faster than they could conduct last rites for their congregations. Harvests rotted in the fields. Church bells rang ceaselessly until there was no one left to pull the ropes. In just a couple of years, England lost nearly half of its population. They were taken not by swords or starvation, but by something invisible and utterly unstoppable. That year, survival became a matter of blind chance. And when this horror began, there was nowhere on the island to seek refuge. Death arrived by sea. A ship from Gascony anchored in Malcolm, a harbor near Weymouth, just before June 24, 1348. Chroniclers of the time refer to this moment as the beginning of the greatest catastrophe in English history. From Weymouth, the contagion spread rapidly through Dorset, then engulfed Devon and Somerset, before moving north to Bristol, one of the largest and most bustling cities in the kingdom.
As one chronicler wrote, the plague left the countryside utterly void of inhabitants. Nearby Gloucester slammed its gates shut against the people of Bristol, but it mattered little. The disease required no permission to travel. By the autumn of 1348, it was already knocking at the doors of London. At the start of that fateful year, England's population stood at around 6 million. 2 years later, that number was plummeting toward 3 million. Half the nation had been ground to dust, and the country was only just beginning to grasp the horror it was facing. To understand why England fell so rapidly, one must look at what the plague did to the human body. The culprit was the bacterium Yersinia pestis. It spread primarily through the bites of infected fleas, which hitched rides on rats, hiding in the grain, cloth, and timber moving through every market town. Once inside the body, the disease struck the lymphatic system. Within days, lymph nodes swelled into hard, agonizingly painful lumps in the groin, armpits, or neck. These were called buboes. This was the manifestation of the bubonic plague.
But England also faced the pneumonic form, an infection spread simply through breath by being near the afflicted. This version killed even faster. It required neither fleas nor rats, only the proximity of another human being. A third form, septicemic, drove the bacteria directly into the bloodstream, leaving almost no time between infection and death. Fever was followed by the blackening of the skin, and the end arrived within a couple of days of the first symptoms. Medieval physicians bled their patients, applied herbs, and prayed. They meticulously recorded their observations, yet they could not explain why one household lost all 4 members, while their neighbor behind the wall never fell ill at all. This mystery, unsolvable for the minds of 1348, would haunt England for 3 more long years. By the winter of 1348, the plague was no longer just a coastal threat. It moved inland, traveling along every road, every river, and every trade route England had built over centuries. From Bristol, it followed the merchants, shadowed the pilgrims, and rode on carts of grain. Winchester fell, Salisbury fell, Oxford fell.
Death infiltrated London through 3 simultaneous routes: overland via Salisbury, by road from Gloucester, and by sea on merchant vessels. London's narrow alleys slick with sewage, its overcrowded tenements, and its status as Northern Europe's busiest port hub made the capital a perfect incubator for the epidemic. Outside the city walls, massive plague pits had to be excavated, as parish churchyards simply ran out of ground. By the spring of 1349, the disease had engulfed the entirety of southern England, and by summer, it turned north toward Yorkshire, Durham, and Cumberland. These counties, already bled dry by decades of Scottish raids, stood utterly defenseless. Distance offered only a delay, not salvation. England was learning a bitter lesson. In a connected kingdom, no corner was remote enough to hide. In medieval England, the church was not merely a religious institution, it was the foundation of daily life. Priests recorded births and deaths, administered last rites, and managed hospitals. They were the primary link between the common people and authority, and the plague decimated them in horrific numbers. A clergyman's duty required constant proximity to the sick and dying. Last rites could not be performed from a distance. In the Diocese of Bath and Wells, the bishop issued a desperate decree. If no priest could be found, the dying were permitted to confess to a layman or even to a woman. For that era, this was a theological catastrophe. In some dioceses, half of the parish clergy perished within 2 years. In response, the church began ordaining men with minimal training. But the spiritual damage proved far worse than the numbers. People watched as their shepherds died just like everyone else, regardless of their status or closeness to God. This observation sowed a seed of doubt that would eventually grow into one of the most significant challenges to church authority in the nation's history.
England in 1348 was primarily an agrarian nation. Nearly 90% of the population lived not in cities, but in small villages and farming communities scattered across the vast countryside. And it was here that the heaviest blow fell. Imagine a village of 100 people. A single outbreak could claim 60 lives in just a few weeks. Unlike a city, a village had no spare people. When the plowman died, the fields became overgrown with weeds. When the miller died, there was no one to grind the grain. When the reeve, who managed all the work on the estate, perished, the economic life of the community simply ground to a halt. In some manors, mortality among the peasantry reached 80%. In neighboring estates, only 1 in 5 died. The plague struck unevenly, but it struck everywhere. Between 1350 and 1500, more than 1,300 villages vanished from the face of England. These ghost settlements were swallowed by forests and wild fields. The land remained, the mills survived, but the people who had cultivated these lands for centuries, who knew every neighbor and every blade of grass, were gone. The country looked the same from a bird's eye view, but inside it had become completely hollow. Without understanding the true causes of the disease, people fled in panic. The wealthy had a choice, the poor did not. Landowners took refuge in their secluded country estates. Bishops migrated between their residences. Merchants shuttered their shops and retreated to quiet towns. But within this flight lay a cruel irony. The fugitives carried the contagion with them, bringing it to places that had yet to hear of its arrival. The roads of England became the primary arteries for the spread of death. For those who could not flee, the laborers, serfs, and the destitute, survival meant staying put, watching their neighbors fade away and waiting for their own turn, which could come as early as tomorrow. Under this colossal pressure, social bonds began to snap. Chroniclers shuddered as they recorded how people abandoned the sick, even within their own families. Parents left their children, children turned away from their parents. The plague destroyed more than just bodies. It eroded the very web of duty and love upon which English society was built. The dead left behind more than just grief. Lands, livestock, tools, and unharvested crops stood abandoned. But most importantly, they left behind a labor market that had been turned upside down. Before the plague, England had more hands than work. Lords held absolute power over the peasantry. Wages were low, and the master dictated the terms. After the catastrophe, the equation changed. The living suddenly became a scarcity, and scarcity dictates its own rules. Surviving laborers began demanding higher wages, sometimes 2 or 3 times the previous rate. In some manors, plowmen asked for 5 times what they had earned before the epidemic. The lords were furious, but they had no choice. The livestock required care.
The harvest could not wait, and you cannot put a dead man to the plow. King Edward III attempted to issue laws forbidding wage increases, but the courts were powerless against the mathematics of mass death. A body could burn out in just a couple of days, but the mind had to live on amidst the deaths of loved ones, finding no logical explanation. Medieval England had only one system of coordinates, the theological. The disease was considered God's punishment for sins. Many fell into deep penance, fasting, praying, and giving away their property, believing the end of the world had already arrived. Others chose a different path, the path of unrestrained hedonism. People indulged in drinking and wastefulness, as if abstinence had lost all meaning since death took everyone regardless. Both reactions were perfectly logical responses to a completely absurd situation. When the chances of life turn into a lottery, a person seeks the illusion of control. The question that remained unanswered then, and which historians approach with caution even today, is why did some survive while others did not? Survival did not depend on wealth. Rich men died, bishops died, and renowned knights died. The king's own daughter perished from the plague on the way to her own wedding in France. Yes, poverty and filth increased the risks, but gold offered only a fragile illusion of security. To a large extent, salvation was embedded in biology. Modern research shows that certain genetic mutations provided partial resistance to the plague bacteria. But in 1348, no one knew this. People saw only a terrifying pattern. A husband would die while his wife remained alive. Of two children in the same room, the disease would take one, leaving the other untouched. There was no system to it, and it was precisely this lack of logic that terrified people the most. By 1351, the worst was over, but the plague did not bid farewell to England. It returned again and again, rolling in waves for over a century. This massive demographic void changed everything. Peasants grew wealthier, acquiring vast tracts of land. And when the authorities tried to tighten the screws, the Great Peasants' Revolt of 1381 erupted. The rebels demanded freedom, and though the uprising was suppressed, serfdom in England soon practically died out. The plague didn't intend to liberate anyone, but death has no interest in the plans of the powerful. Survival was not a reward. It turned into a heavy burden. People awoke in a void. England slowly rose from the ashes, but the generation that survived this darkness carried something indelible within them. They had seen with their own eyes how the righteous perish and the wicked survive. This scar remained forever. The Black Death killed more than just people. It killed the former perception of the world, a world where every suffering has a cause and the future can be predicted. England survived, but it was forever changed. The question is not just what our ancestors had to endure. The question is what we would do if it happened again. This is the Spirit of Old America channel. Usually we dive into the history of the New World, but today we looked back at those dark times that shook old Europe and laid the foundation for the world we live in now. If this story felt important to you, please share it. Subscribe to our channel to gain a deeper understanding of the history that shaped modernity. There is much more to come.